ahead and get started. So I want to thank everybody for joining today's webinar. My name is Veronica Buckwalter. I'm with the National Students Attendance Engagement Success Center. Welcome to today's webinar, Recruiting and Preparing Success Mentors, Students and Families for a Successful Mentoring Experience. Before we begin, I'd like to share some brief details about the webinar. The webinar today will last for approximately 90 minutes with time built in for questions. Everyone has been automatically placed on mute upon entry into the webinar, and only our panelists will be unmuted throughout the presentation. Therefore, if you have a question, please feel free to utilize either the Q&A or the chat panels you'll find on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen if you have a question or a comment. Please feel free to submit questions or comments at any point throughout the presentation, and our presenters will be pausing along the way to answer your questions. If we don't have enough time to get through all of your questions, we'll try to respond to as many as possible via email within the next few days. We encourage you to ask questions or simply share comments with our presenters. The webinar today is being recorded. The recording and the slides will be made available to all registrants, and the recording will be posted to the National TA Center's temporary website. And a link to this website should be popping up momentarily in the chat function, and we'll post it again periodically throughout the presentation so that you have access to it. Next slide, please. Today's webinar is one of a number being offered by the National Student Attendance Engagement and Success Center during 2018. The National TA Center was launched in 2016 and is funded by the Department of Education's Office of Safe and Healthy Students. The mission of the center is to disseminate evidence-based practices and build and facilitate communities of practice to help students attend every day, be engaged in school, and succeed academically so that they graduate high school prepared for college, career, and civic life. Next slide. The two communities of practice referred to in the center's missions are focused on the 30 National My Brother's Keepers Success Mentor sites and the many School Improvement Grant and School Improvement Grant eligible schools throughout the country that are working to implement early warning system programs to address chronic absenteeism. Although we have run into several unanticipated delays in launching our formal Technical Assistance Center website, which will be housed on the Department of Education's website, we are pleased to announce that we anticipate this site going live within the next few weeks. So please be on the lookout for an announcement about the launch of our full website, which will be available soon. So today's webinar is being presented by Delia Hagan of Mentor, the National Mentoring Partnership. Mentor is a partner on the National Student Attendance Engagement and Success Center, bring expertise in mentoring best practices as well as training and technical assistance on school-integrated mentoring models like Success Mentors. Delia Hagan, Program Director at Mentor, has been coordinating this work at Mentor National, and she will be co-presenting today's webinar in partnership with LaHache Cohen of Mentor New York. Delia is a social worker who formerly managed a community-based mentoring program and who currently leads Mentor's education initiative. Delia is also a mentor herself and has served as a mentor to a young woman for over 12 years. So Delia, at this point, I'm going to go ahead and pass things over to you to get us started with today's presentation.
Thanks, Veronica, and thanks everyone for being here with us today. Before I introduce Jean, I just wanted to let you know we are really hoping that this will be an interactive webinar for all of you. We have a small group today, so we're hoping you'll use that chat box as much as you would like to, and I'll be monitoring that chat box throughout the webinar. So if you have questions, thoughts, stories you want to share, just please feel free to interact with us using that box as much as you would like to. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Jean LaHache Cohen of Mentor New York. Jean has been involved with non-for-profit organizations for 30 years, and she has been with Mentor New York for 21 years. Motivating and directing volunteers is one of her areas of expertise, and she has trained over 14,000 volunteers in mentoring. which is a pretty big number. Her work has ranged from developing school-based mentoring programs to finding compatible business and government partners to produce online resource materials and newsletters for programs across New York State. And she travels throughout the state doing training and technical assistance for mentoring programs and mentoring coalitions. She's the author of Mentoring at the Middle School. And Mentor New York, the organization, assists nearly 600 different mentoring programs, and they serve over 60,000 young people. Most recently, Jean has served as a resource to the U.S. Department of Education's Success Mentors Coalition for the My Brother's Keeper initiative. And this is something Jean and I have in common. She has mentored the same young woman for 10 years. So hi, Jean, and welcome.
So much. It's really a privilege to be here, and I thank you, those of you who are dialing in and participating. I thought we'd just go over what our objectives are for this time that we have together and make sure that we're using your time wisely. So we're going to talk about timeline and strategies and tools for how to recruit success mentors. And it's a little different recruiting people who are going to come into the school frequently, more frequently than a traditional mentor. We're going to share the qualities of an effective mentor and considerations and what resources are out there for screening mentors, depending on which type of mentor you're going to recruit. And we're also going to be talking about recruiting on the other side of the coin, which is recruiting students and families to participate in the Success Mentor programs and to how to prepare them for successful mentoring relationships so it works well for both sides. One of the other things we wanted to do at this moment is to ask you, the participants, are there other things that you want to make sure we talk about today? If you could use the chat box and just let us know if there's something else you hoped we would cover. Let us know that now by typing it in. We'll give you a minute or so to do that, because as long as we've got experts here, we'd really love to be able to make sure you leave with all your questions answered. Personally, we work with mentoring programs in over 300 schools, and 225 of them are Success Mentors programs, meaning they focus on chronic absenteeism. So did anybody add something that they want us to cover today?
Not yet. It looks like, just wanted to remind folks too, when you're sending in your chats, please select all participants, and that way we can see what you've added in. And while you're there, we're hoping that you can introduce yourself. So while you're telling us what you want to get out of the webinar, maybe also indicate, what your name is, what your role is, and we'd also like to know whether you already have a mentoring program in place in your school or district. So we'll give you, again, a moment to go ahead and do that, and don't forget to choose all participants. So we might have a shy audience, or we might be getting folks sending things to the host. But either way, I think maybe we'll give folks a few minutes to respond and then revisit that question in a few minutes, if that sounds okay. Mm-hmm. I'll move to our agenda for the day. So for our agenda, we are going to start by going over the different types of mentors that you might want to recruit for your school's program and some strategies for each of those. And often when we talk about recruitment in the mentoring world, we're referring to mentors, but we're also going to give you some tips today and some strategies for recruiting students and families, because that's such a hugely critical, important part of the process as well. And we'll be doing some activities throughout our time together to help you practice some key recruitment skills. And while we can't do justice to the topic of screening mentors today, since it's so linked to the recruitment process, we're going to touch briefly on it so you know what to think about as you prepare for that very, very important step in the process, screening your mentors. And finally, we're going to end with a sample recruitment timeline so you can think about what your process will be, some resources, and some Q&A. But again, please feel free to post your questions throughout the webinar, and we'll be sure to get to them at the end. All right. So we'd like to start with an interactive activity to launch us right into a key recruitment skill that's relevant to communicating with mentors, students, and families about your program. So successful recruitment takes effective and concise communication with busy people who could be your students' mentors. So we wanted to ask you to take 1 minute and brainstorm a 1 to 2 sentence elevator pitch for your mentoring program. And it sounds like not a lot, but we find that the shorter it is, the harder it sometimes is. So take that 1 minute and think of a 1 to 2 sentence elevator pitch for your mentoring program. If you don't have a mentoring program yet, we want to ask, what would you say to someone if you had an amazing student in need of a mentor and you wanted to ask them to volunteer to mentor the student? So again, even if you have no mentoring program right now, just think about what would you say to someone if you really wanted to ask them to be a mentor for a specific student? So I'll give you 30 seconds to write down your pitch, or you can go ahead and type it directly into the chat box, and we'll read out your responses in a minute. And as we're doing that, I have gotten one intro. We hope others who are joining now will feel free to type in their name, their role, whether they have a mentoring program, if there's something else they want to get out of this webinar. But I have someone introducing herself, Denise from Governor's Prevention Partnership. Hello, Denise, welcome. And she is a training and TA provider in Connecticut for 8 districts, also providing some technical assistance for folks in Maine as well. And she says she's interested in the family engagement component of Success Mentors and how that differs between elementary, middle, and high schools. So that's a good one, Denise, and we'll see if we can speak to that a little bit in terms of recruiting students and families towards the end. We'll give folks another minute to enter their elevator pitch, see if we get any brave souls willing to share their 1 to 2 sentence elevator pitch. Don't worry don't struggle too hard with it. We're not very harsh critics. We won't tear you apart.
There's no grade.
No grades.
No grade.
Okay, so no elevator pitches yet. Jean, given that we don't have any brave souls willing to volunteer quite yet, do you have any tips that you'd share in the meantime for how to do a successful elevator pitch to a mentor?
I think that there are 2 critical things to think about when you're talking about your mentoring program. One is mentoring is a somewhat vague concept in the sense that if I asked you to volunteer at a soup kitchen, you would know that you're going to dish out food or clean up dishes, and so it's pretty straightforward. Whereas if I ask you to volunteer as a mentor, you're not necessarily sure what you're going to do. So to the extent that you can make your elevator pitch specific so that people have a sense of, oh, I can do that, that would be a really good thing. So would you like to come in? We have an opportunity to give kids a chance to talk to business people from the community about how they found their careers and what they like about them, and give them a different perspective on the work world. So that gives somebody a picture like, oh, I can talk about work and how I got to this place. So you've given them a little insight about I can do that job. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is to keep your elevator pitch short and focused on why the person you're speaking to would be interested in talking about it. So it's not heavy on all the challenges that kids face, because you could probably list 100 things that your different students face and challenges, but focusing on why would you, as a guy riding the elevator with me, be interested in talking about it. So if it's an office building, you probably search for finding the new workforce that's well-prepared and interested to have an opportunity to work for a company like yours. Have you thought about having your employees get involved in mentoring in our mentoring program to help develop that new workforce for you? So that's thinking about what's going to make that person interested in being a mentor.
Thanks, Jean. Yeah, that's perfect. And I think the only thing I would add on one way that I've had some success, I think sometimes when you're a leader of a mentoring program or anything else, people often want to know, like, what's your motivation for for trying to get me to do this. So in terms of authenticity, I think it's helpful sometimes to share your own personal connection to the work. So if you can lead with just a brief story about why mentoring is important to you. For me, I like to tell folks that I had a middle school teacher who was there at the right time for me and inspired me to apply for some programs that ended up sort of shaping my career moving forward. And just talking about the emotional experience of that at that stage of life is something that I think a lot of people can relate to, especially if they know you're coming from also a very authentic place, and that's why you're interested in getting them involved. So just another idea. Feel free, folks, to go ahead and type in those elevator pitches throughout the webinar, too, if they come to you a little bit later, and we can take some time to revisit. And don't forget to select all participants. But we'll go ahead and move on now to just talking a little bit about why we're going to focus on recruitment today. So for those of you who are not familiar with the elements of effective practice for mentoring, they're listed here on this slide, and essentially they are Mentor and our network's cornerstone publication. They detail research-informed and practitioner-approved standards for creating and sustaining youth mentoring programs and impactful mentoring relationships that result from them. The fourth edition was released in September 2015, and it reflects the most up-to-date research, practice, and thinking in our mentoring field. And so we feel like these standards are applicable across any type of youth mentoring program. Each standard includes benchmarks that really ensure the safety and the effectiveness of the mentoring relationships, as well as enhancements that might be promising, innovative, or useful for programs. And the easiest way to find this document, if you're looking for it right now, is just to Google it. The elements of effective practice for mentoring, it'll come right up, and you can select it. We definitely are going to be referring to it throughout, so I want to let you all know what it is. And it's also the backbone of the technical assistance that Mentor and our network provide to schools and districts across the country at no cost through the National Student Attendance Engagement and Success Center, and also through another national center that we operate, the National Mentoring Resource Center. And so, schools and districts have asked for support on all of these elements. We've helped folks with recruitment plans, mentor training plans, things along those lines, curricula, really across the board. But the reason we're focusing on mentor recruitment and student and family recruitment today is because it's the spring. And I know for a lot of you, the school year is coming to a close. Some of us are closer than others. Here in Boston, we've had a few snowstorms, and so our school year is not ending until, I believe, the end of June, much to the chagrin of Boston youth everywhere. But some of you might be coming to a close of, the end of the school year. And so we wanted to talk about recruitment now because recruitment is a process that really should start in the spring of the prior year that you are going to be operating your program, right? So if you want to launch in the fall, you should definitely be thinking about mentor recruitment in the spring, and then throughout the summer, and then again in the fall. So it is a timely topic for us, and we'll talk more about a specific timeline a little bit later. And just so you all know, we've done webinars on these other elements as well at different times through the National Student Attendance Engagement and Success Center. And in the fall, we'll be doing another webinar on mentor training, which will be timely for those who are kicking off a program at that time, and then monitoring and support, since that will be an important piece of your fall plans as well. So again, if you're thinking about starting a program or you already have one up and running, please let us know so we can make sure that this webinar is as useful for you as possible. So before I kick it over to Jean, I just wanted to make a couple of comments just about, what we're going to be discussing for recruitment. So, school-based mentoring has been going on for a long time. It's been a big part of our mentoring field for quite a while, and traditional programs may have focused more on, longer-term relationships that start at the beginning of the school year and end towards the end of the school year, or might even continue throughout multiple grades, which is wonderful, and the research really backs up how important that long-term relationship can be. But we also, we wanted to kind of quickly share that we are going to be focusing today's conversation on a model called Success Mentors, which has really been championed by the National Student Attendance Engagement and Success Center because it is an evidence-based intervention for students and it's focused on attendance. We're not going to be going into the ins and outs of this model today, but there is a full webinar on that model and all the different supports and practices that make it effective on the NSA ESC webpage. So you can get, a real deeper dive on that model and what makes it unique. But we just wanted to note that, as a reminder for those who are familiar, it involves more frequent interactions with students in the school environment. So like 2 to 3 times per week, mentors and students are interacting together. And it really builds on natural connections between students and caring adults in the school, as well as students and their peers. Some programs have explored more of a peer model. And the idea is to build this sense of belonging and support for students and help them to overcome and identify potential barriers to attendance through strengths-based partnerships with students and their families. So just important to know that that's really the goal of this program, and the goal of your program is really going to influence the type of mentors that you're looking for. It's going to really influence how you go about recruitment, what you talk about when you recruit mentors. So just wanted to locate us in that spectrum of school-based mentoring programs. However, I do think it's what we're going to be talking about today is really relevant to any school-based mentoring program as well. And so you can customize the tips that we're giving you, to another type of program as well. So I will kick it over to Jean now to talk a little bit about the different types of mentors that are involved in Success Mentors programs.
So you should know for many years we, in New York, we had started school-based mentoring programs, over 140 of them in different schools, that were more traditional mentoring models. So the mentor and the student met one time a week for about 45 minutes, or a school period that seemed to work for them. And it was predicated on that regular attendance. And it was important because for some students, especially on Long Island where there's no student transportation, we couldn't get students to a community-based model necessarily, or there wasn't one in their community, but putting it into the school was a way to get them served. But one of the things we knew when we started models like that was it left out a population of children who weren't attending school regularly, because we couldn't place them with a mentor who would come one Thursday afternoon a week, and that might not be the time that the student was in attendance. So it would be frustration for the mentor, who might then give up, was another thing that the student couldn't be successful at. And so we started to turn to school staff, and lo and behold, that was a brilliant model. When they instituted the test to the pilot to actually try to fight chronic absenteeism, we were very excited because we saw those kids as kids not being served by the more traditional models. And lo and behold, using school staff was a natural fit for mentors for those students, because they're there every day, whether or not the student attends, and they can then outreach to the student the day that the student is there. And when we say school staff, we do mean staff. We don't say school teachers. We say staff because we really mean anybody who's in the school building can be an effective success mentor to a student. And in fact, one of the things we realized is that many school staff are already informal mentors to a couple, 1, 2, 3, 4 students already every day. A teacher who had a student last year, the student comes by once a week or twice a week to say, well, I'm not sure that Mr. Johnson really likes me, or gave me a hard time about my homework, or I think he's picking up whatever they're going to share. They're connected to that teacher. Or it's perhaps the lady in who is the school secretary or a custodian. She's got some extra time. She's walking around the building, and lo and behold, there's a kid walking with her talking. All those school staff people are, in many cases, informal mentors to children already. We like to use them for the Success Mentors model because they're there every day. So if a student isn't there for a couple of days, they can be on the lookout when the student comes to school and say, I missed you yesterday. You okay? I was really looking forward to seeing you. I'm so glad you're here today. That kind of consistent contact can be really important, and it also reminds the student that someone is paying attention to whether or not they're there. sometimes students think, well, if I'm not there, nobody even notices that I'm not there. So internal school staff is a great resource, and we've seen it working for over 20 years. The last 6 years, we've seen it amazingly work on attendance. But other people who are internal to the school can be people like a City Year program, where they push in AmeriCorps members or other City Year members. I don't know if you have City Year in your communities, but many schools have AmeriCorps members who are actually brought on board for the year and trained to work with kids. Again, they're there 30 hours a week to work with students. So they're there consistently. They can provide that consistent recognition that the student's there or not there and do that outreach. And then there's also, of course, external members of the community. And I'll touch a little bit about screening a little bit later. But one of the things about using an external community partner, which can be great in so many ways, like a bank, a chamber of commerce, social work, students, interns. These people have a vested interest in making their community stronger, so they're committed partners, and they really want to be there doing something positive. One of the things you have to think about, though, when you use volunteers like that is the success of the success model, and I have to find another way to say that, really comes from the frequency of the meetings, the frequency of the time that the mentors in the school seeing whether or not the student is there and connecting with them. And for somebody who's outside the community and not regularly in the school, you really have to ask them to think about, is it realistic for you to be able to be here as many times as you would need to be here to be successful for this particular program? We'll also talk a bit, as I said, about screening. One of the things, though, about community partners, never turn away a community partner, because there probably are students in your school who are not chronically absent, but could benefit from having a mentor in his or her life. And you could have a separate mentoring program for students who are there every day and who need that additional outside support or friend or guide. You could recruit a community member who might not be able to be there 3 times a week, but could be there once a week. Can we recruit them for a different program? So never turn away a volunteer unless you screen them out and you don't want them, all right? So do we have any questions about who the mentors are? I didn't touch on peer mentors, and peer mentors can be incredibly effective in all kinds of mentoring programs, and especially success mentors, because the peer students are in the school as well. We're not going to talk about it today because having a peer mentoring model, and we do, I believe, have a webinar available with resources to talk about a peer program. Is that right, Delia?
Right, yeah, it's on the NSA-ESB webpage, yeah.
And the reason is because having a peer model requires more structure because they're high school students, and so they don't have the life experience that adults might have to bring to the issue. So there needs to be more structure. There needs to have some curriculum, a little more intense supervision. They're remarkably effective, and they're great for the younger kids and great for the older kids too. But we're not going to be able to cover them today because, in fact, it really is a different animal, and you want to look through all the components to make a successful peer program. So do we have any questions so far?
It doesn't look like any questions yet, but I will shout them out to you as they show up.
Okay, so let's talk about recruiting internal mentors. So the first thing I'm going to say, it's actually the third point, but many teachers and school staff are already informal mentors. And if you think back to your growing up time about who was a mentor to you, even in an informal way, you probably will think about a teacher, a school administrator, a coach, the guidance counselor. Those people in your growing up years probably served as a mentor to you, and that's going on every day. I remind people that people who work in schools do not take those jobs because they make $1 million there. They don't have a red carpet or paparazzi outside the door every time they leave the school building. They actually become teachers or work in schools because they genuinely like kids. And so they're already probably serving in this role. So what you want to do is take the first couple of steps and clearly communicate what the expectation you have for them to be a mentor, recognizing that many of them are already doing it. So tell them, I'd like you to touch base 3 times a week with your students, and then 1 day a week, maybe have a sandwich together or talk for 20 minutes or a half an hour. And I'm going to give you, make sure you get some training so you can feel a little more comfortable in your role. And we're going to recognize you in the schools for what you're doing because we know you're doing this already. So this is a chance to recognize you for the work you do above and beyond the good teaching you do in the classroom. It's great if you can give them write out what the eligibility requirements are. So they have to have some free time to be able to talk to the student and catch up with them. And you might want to announce this opportunity through some different channels. So a flyer in their mailboxes, although I don't know if they do that anymore in schools, but an email, a newsletter blurb. Our favorite at Mentor New York is getting a chance to have 15 to 20 minutes of staff meeting. And my colleague John, who's an expert in recruiting staff to be mentors in schools, knows that he will get 20 to 25% of the people who are at the staff meeting will come up and volunteer before the day is over. So before he leaves the building, he'll have 20 to 25% of the 100 people who are there or the 50 people who are there. That's the number. And it really speaks to, not that John says it's not that I'm that persuasive, he said those are the people who are doing it already, and they'd be glad to get a little training, get some recognition, and they'd be willing to take on another kid or two. So we think a staff meeting is a great place to talk about it. For people who are interested but have more questions, a simple group presentation, maybe just schedule a half-an-hour presentation, give them cookies and coffee or whatever you want to do, just to let them ask their specific questions about it. But not rocket science to recruit, and not needing a lot of glitzy PR, just some information about what their expectations are, how we're going to give you a little bit of training, and this is what you do to sign up. So not so complicated to do. All right, how about next slide?
Yeah, so on this next slide, I just wanted to kind of echo Jean, what she just shared about all the different information you want to be giving to mentors. We find that it's really, really helpful to have a document that's essentially a job description for the mentor. This is just so helpful to kind of ground the mentor in. Like Jean said earlier, not everybody knows what a mentor is or what the expectations are, and the recruitment process is really your first chance to help manage expectations and make sure people are volunteering for the right reasons, that they understand what they're signing up for. So, you know, here's a couple things that you'd want to include on your job description for your mentors, and we've included as a handout an example from Mentor New York that you can check out here. I'm just showing it to you on the screen here. But some of the things you want to definitely have on here are the mentor's role, so just a description of their role, the time commitment that's going to be involved, the requirements for their participation. A lot of the time we like to share with mentors, hey, you're going to be expected to check in with someone about how it's going, you know, this many times per year, over the phone or email or whatever way that you've determined is going to work for your mentor. So just making sure that they understand that. And it's helpful to tell them, you know, what are the qualities that we're looking for in a mentor. So you'll see here there's a list of some qualities, there's a list of responsibilities. So it's just helpful to be clear about all of that. And then of course you want to make sure that you have the contact information for signing up. Can't underestimate the importance of, you know, helping move them through the process in a really clear way. What's the next step is always a good thing to make sure is on there. So now I'm going to kick it over to Jean again to lead us in a quick activity to help you with this part of the process.
So one of the things that I always try to think about is, why should the person I'm talking to be interested in what I'm trying to sell? And I am trying to sell something. I'm trying to sell mentoring. I'd like to think it's a higher purpose, but it's still selling something. So what are the benefits to me, to be a mentor. And I'd like you to stop and think about what are some of the benefits for people to volunteer in your Success Mentors program. And if you can just jot them down in the chat box, one or two things that you think would be interesting for someone to be a mentor in your program. It can be either a staff member, it could be an external member like someone from AmeriCorps, or it could be somebody from RSVP, which is the Retired Senior Volunteer Program, somebody from the Chamber of Commerce, and it could also just be a community member who just retired and doesn't want to play golf every day and might like to be engaged in the school a little better. So what are some of the benefits? So just take a minute and think about your community and what would you say a benefit to a mentor could be?
Mm-hmm. And Jean, I've gotten a couple of responses over here, and feel free, folks, to submit your chats to all participants or Delia Hagan. That's fine as well. But we've gotten a couple. So one is just personal fulfillment and just giving back is one that I'm seeing, and then another one is being a part of a community of people that are helping others. So those are just a couple examples. We've also got, Denise wrote in, a deeper connection with a student and being a part of a cohort of mentors, which can be really fun.
Oh, that's excellent. And, you know, that, Denise, that's a really good point to make. Many people who went into teaching, into education, really, in the back of their minds, my mom was a teacher for 40 years, hoped for connections with the kids, and of course she had them, but when you teach high school especially, you might have 140 students during the day come through your class, and you don't have a lot of time to make those individual connections, and it's something that, you know, they wouldn't say they, you know, would leave teaching because they didn't have it, but having that connection with a student and watching them grow and expand their horizons and achieve their dreams is actually personally pretty fulfilling for people who went into it. So I think that's a great example that you might think about. It's a little harder nowadays to have those connections in our schools just because of the workload they have, the mandates they have to cover, and the number of students that might be in a particular classroom. Are there any other things that we want to highlight?
Just one more, satisfaction, helping someone mature and achieve their goals.
These are all good points. I'm going to tell you one other. I'm going to tell you about Edna. One of my first jobs years ago, I did a training for potential mentors in a school-based program, and Edna came along. She was 92, and I thought, okay, she's brave, you know, to be mentoring middle school kids. And when I went to do the training, I asked people, can you think about who mentored you? And Edna raised her hand and said, is it okay if I talk about who my mentor is now? And I thought, oh my gosh, I hope I live to 92, and I hope when I'm 92 I have a mentor. But what Edna said to me was she is a CPA, or she was a CPA, and she used to help old people do their taxes. I don't know how the 92 she was talking about, but she said with young people made her feel young and kept her connected to a whole nother generation of kids. And it was, she said, they were delicious to listen to and to hear their challenges and their successes. So for Edna, it was a way to stay connected to her community, her young community, not just the old people she helped with their taxes. So these are reasons. And you want to think about these reasons because you want to be selling mentoring based on what the benefit is to the mentor, not just because you want them to do good, but also you want them to get something out of it, because we know mentoring is at its core a friendship between the mentor and mentee, and all the research tells us that the power in the mentoring relationship comes from the strength of the friendship. So you can convince people to come forward who will see benefits from being in a mentoring relationship that's just going to be better for the mentor and for the kid. So these are all reasons. You might think about who else in your community has a vested interest in mentoring your kids. So I mentioned the Chamber of Commerce a couple of times. That's a place where local businesses may not have many positive interactions with kids. They see the kids hanging around after school, but they don't buy very much or whatever. But when you start talking to them about where do you get the kids who you want to have work for you in the summertime, or how do you want to engage them differently, those Chamber of Commerce businesses who serve as mentors, have their employees serve as mentors, actually form a different relationship with the school, and they really become good partners as opposed to adversaries who are talking about these teenagers today. They have a vested interest in the community being a really healthy one, and having a good relationship with the kids and their families is a great thing for the local business. Okay, so recruiting mentors through partnerships. Just so you know that we have, Mentor has 26, is that right, Delia? Affiliates?
Yeah.
Around the country. Mentor New York is just one. We think we're a great one, but they're all great. But in your community, there could be an affiliate that will serve you and help you access the tools that you use, but also tools about Success Mentors on Mentor's website, as well as the national, the NSAES. Did I say that right?
Got it.
There will be tools on that website as well. And the other thing is there are lots of other potential partners and other tools around different kinds of mentoring, as I mentioned before, and all these things are things you can explore. You should reach out to the mentor affiliate in your area. If you are in an unserved state, reach out directly to Delia, and she can partner you with technical assistance and support, even if there's not an affiliate for your state. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
When you're talking about partnerships outside of the school building, again, you want to discuss the need of the students, the availability and suitability of volunteers. Make sure they understand the frequency that you need to be able to make the Success Mentors program work. And then you will have to talk about screening and training for people outside the school building. You are going to talk about training for people inside the school building, but screening is very different because if someone is a staff member or someone comes to you from City Year, as an example, they're already screened. If you're going to bring community members in, well, you'll want to do national FBI fingerprint check, references, written application, and an interview. And again, your affiliate will help you with that to make sure that the people who come forward you want to place in proximity to a child. Mm-hmm. You want to develop a process for recruiting, screening, orienting and onboarding people, and providing support to mentors in partnership with whatever organization you're going to partner with, whether it's the Kiwanis Club or a fraternity, a local business. You want to work up a plan so you can go forward with that. And those are places where Mentor has tools to help you do that, but also your affiliate can help you with training and technical assistance to go through that part. So any questions about recruiting mentors through partnerships?
No questions coming in yet.
Okay.
You'll chat them in, everyone. Yeah, and thank you, Jean. That's a great overview of what it looks like to partner with organizations. And we really, here at National, we really encourage folks to do that. If there is a community partner in your area that has expertise in mentoring, community-based programs, maybe it's City Year, maybe it's AmeriCorps, maybe it's a Big Brothers Big Sisters organization or another local mentoring program that can provide the infrastructure that you need to do all of that training and support. Maybe not all of it, but a bulk of it. It's really then becomes about coordinating with them to make sure that it's meeting your standards and that it's hitting the mark versus you having to create everything yourself. And so we discourage that, you know, as much as possible because we know how strapped schools are for capacity. But we also know that a lot of schools and districts are coming from rural areas that may not have a wealth of community partners available, or, you know, they may, urban areas, it can be the same. It just sort of depends on your landscape. And in a minute, we're going to talk about you know, resource mapping and asset mapping and what that can look like for schools and districts. But it just depends on the availability of partnerships and also whether you do have a dedicated student support person at your school or mentor coordinator who can really serve this role. And if you do, and if you're looking to do this work internally, we wanted to give you a couple of tips for, you know, things to think about as you're doing that, right? So if you're looking to recruit mentors from the community, from, say, the public in your area, it does require a lot more infrastructure and a lot more in-house resources. So you're going to have to do that direct kind of building a pipeline of volunteers, recruiting from the community, putting out this messaging that we had talked about earlier, going out and speaking to people about the program, and then really building a screening and onboarding process all in-house. And so it does require more staffing resources to make sure that the volunteers you're working with are safe, are suitable, are prepared. You know, the screening stuff that we're going to talk about in a little bit, sometimes there are expenses associated with that, and there are definitely quality standards that you want to meet. So it's just important to do your research on what the requirements are to bring an adult from the community into the school environment. But we also want folks to ask themselves, you know, if you're working with a person from the community who is interested in volunteering, but they're not already affiliated with the school or a community partner, you might want to ask yourself, what's going to be different for potential mentors who don't work with young people every day, right? So when you're training and working with mentors inside the school, they have so much knowledge already about how to work with young people, what's developmentally appropriate, you know, what young people's experiences are. And so asking yourself that question, you know, if I didn't work with young people every day, what might I not know? And that's really going to inform the way you screen and train and support these volunteers really all throughout the process, from recruitment to the closure process. It just requires a little bit more oversight and intentionality around meeting that volunteer where they are, knowing that they may not have that experience that, you know, a school staff person might have. So just a couple considerations.
I always use the example here. Very early on in my career training mentors, we were doing a feedback session, and one of the mentors said, my student didn't tell me the truth about how he did on his report card. And I said, so did he do worse than he told you? He said, yeah. And that's lying. And I said, yes, it is. And he said, well, I don't know if I can work with him. He lied to me. And all I could think of was, oh, man, you don't have a teenager. So I said to him, do you have children of your own? He said, I have a 3-year-old. So I asked the other attendees, do you have teenagers? And they all went, oh, yeah, that's normal. You know, and that's just an example, not to say all teenagers lie, but they're not happy to say, yeah, I got a C on that test when I should have gotten an A or whatever, because they're normal. They're teenagers. And letting the mentor know that this is not personally trying to lie to you, this is sort of what teenagers do when they don't want to face the music. That helped him put it in a different perspective. And he did talk to the student about he'd rather have him be honest so they could have a good relationship. But it took it away from, oh, my God, he's going to be an axe murderer because he lied his homework. And puts it in perspective, like, so other 14-year-olds might do this too.
Right.
Yeah, and I do always ask people who have their own kids, does this mean that your kids never made a stupid mistake when they were growing up? And of course everybody says, no, my kids make stupid mistakes like everybody does. And the kids in mentoring programs are no different than that. Kids don't fully formed with everything all perfect. That's why they're in school, that's why they need to grow up, and for some of them, that's why they need to be in a mentoring program. We need to help to that point.
Yeah, that's such a good example, Jean. Yeah, so I think next I just want to point you guys towards a couple of resources for asset mapping. And I'm just curious for folks who are willing to share with us in the chat box Have you ever done an asset mapping activity? Just yes or no is fine, or if you want to share more, that's fine too. I'm always curious about this because I am a social worker and I was a community organizing major, and so we learned a lot about asset mapping, but when it comes to actually translating it to what does it look like, in practice, that's a whole other thing. And so at the bottom of this slide, you'll see there's a couple of links, and you'll be able to access this slide deck on the web page for the NSAESC in the next few days, I believe. But you can click these links, and they'll take you to Maryland actually created a guide specifically for schools and districts about asset mapping, and it's just helpful to kind of get a sense of what are the types of resources in my community that I can be looking at. There's civic engagement groups, there's education groups, there's groups, for seniors, there's environmental groups, animal care groups, neighborhood associations. There's just so much more, I think, than anybody can just come up with on their own. So nice to see this list and just to have sort of a tool to think about, what existing relationships do you have, and then what potential untapped partnerships might be in your community. There's a Success Mentors program at the convening that we went to this past August or September. It's a district that's been operating for quite a while, and they had, such great leadership in their district. They were so committed to mentoring. They had so many school staff that were volunteering. They had a few community partners, but they really wanted to serve more students, and they had the need for more mentors. And so they ended up partnering with a local fire station and a local police station in their neighborhood and bringing those folks into the school environment. And it took a little bit of finagling, right, to bring those professionals into the school environment that often, 2 to 3 times per week. That's a commitment, but like Jean has been saying, those are organizations that are very committed to the safety of the community, the wellness and the success of the community, so they were interested in supporting youth in that way. So really just exciting to think about all the untapped potential, and also, along the way you might identify some financial resources or some folks that might be interested in supporting you financially as well, or donating some in-kind resources. So it can never hurt to take another look at this. And seeing a response from Denise just saying that she had offered to help someone do some asset mapping, so it's good timing, and I agree. I think it can't hurt to take another look at these resources every so often. So we wanted to ask you all on your own, just for a moment, to just jot down some answers to these questions, because, again, talking about asset mapping is different than actually taking the time to sit down and do it. So while we have you here, just jot down some notes. What sources or resources in your community do you already have access to? So you might have a partnership, but you're not sure how strong it is, or are you really fully utilizing it in terms of recruiting mentors? And then, what sources in your community have you maybe not have even really cultivated yet? What might be out there that you haven't thought of or intentionally started to develop a relationship with them yet? So just take a moment to jot down some ideas, and then think about, following up on some of these as a part of your recruitment plan. So I'll give you just a moment to jot those down either for yourself or in the chat box and share them with us. All right. So, Jean, I'll kick it over to you to just talk a little bit about recruiting students and families.
Sure. And let me just go back and talk about partnerships again. I really encourage you to think outside the box. You might go to the pancake breakfast that the Kiwanis has every year and see all these people who are really, and think to yourself, gee, I wish there were more ways I could connect them with the school. And one school said, we don't have any money to feed the mentors and kids, and because they had a grant, but you couldn't feed people with it. So they went to small businesses around town and asked, would you be the January mentoring breakfast, whatever. So for the month of January, one deli would donate donuts and orange juice 4 times or whatever, and the next month it would be somebody who would donate egg McMuffin sandwiches or whatever. And so it cost the business owner maybe $150 in total, but they posted them as the January or the National Mentoring Month breakfast, or the pizza, pizza provider for February, and it saved the school trying to find funds to feed them. And it also made it more fun for the kids and the mentors. They felt pretty special. They asked the mentors and kids to make sure they tweeted about thanking them. So on social media, they got, thanks and kudos for doing it. And so that's a case where no one small business could provide everything for the whole year, but all of a sudden the whole community was together, pulling it together. So do think outside the box when you think about your community, and do talk to people. If you don't live in the same community where you work, talk to some of your colleagues who do live in town and ask them, who should we be talking to? So let's go on to talk about recruiting students and families. So one of the things about the Success Mentors program that's a little different than how sometimes we faced chronic absenteeism is, at least in New York, we've treated chronic absenteeism as a black mark against, a student and potentially their family. And the Success Mentors program really wants to focus on a strengths-based approach to forming a relationship with families and students and the school. So taking away the stigma about chronic absenteeism and trying to work to improve it. So the first step is identifying who are the chronically absent students. And for some schools, they don't necessarily have that information on a student-by-student basis. And for many schools around the state, I find that they have a total number of attendance. So they have 92% attendance on any particular day. But if you ask them, do you have chronically absent students, meaning the students are missing 2 days a month of school, they don't have a tracking for that. And that's an important piece if you really want to see who you're going to intervene with, and am I making a difference. So being able to identify who the chronically absent students are is a critical part. Now, in New York City, they actually have a data sorter which collects lots of information about attendance, behavior, academics, student by student, and it rolls up to a school level, a grade level, and so there are a lot of different ways to cut it, but not every district has that. If you want to tackle this, you want to find out who are the kids that are absent that month, because if you just look at the overall attendance rate, you're not going to capture who's, you might have perfect attendance and then 5 kids who are only there half the time, and your number could still be over 90%. So what you want to do is tackle those 5 students, so you need to know who's there. So identifying them is a critical piece of this process. You want to figure out who's eligible to be in this program, the Success Mentors, and what are the expectations that we have for the students? What are we hoping to see? What are our goals? What are we going to try and tackle? The first 3 years of the piloting this in New York City, and Mentor New York was lucky enough to be part of that process, we saw the average chronically absent student achieved 9 more days of school, which is almost 2 weeks. And in the 25% of the schools that had the worst cases of chronic absenteeism, the average student gained 20 days. Now, that's almost a whole month of school. That's really important to think about, because that's my goal. I want those kids in their seats at school so they can learn more. So what are my goals? Who's going to be eligible, and what do we want to see happen for them? You want to have materials for parents, caregivers, families, explaining the benefits of mentoring and how they can support the students in the mentoring relationship. And we're going to talk a little bit about outreach to families in terms of recruiting them. And really having a documented, informed process so parents and caregivers can actually understand the goals of the program and give informed consent. All right? And some of this will be, parents may not read over every word. They may not scrutinize it all, but you should have it in place so that everyone on your team, when you're working on it, you're all in the same place about what you're talking about. Because if it's really chronic absenteeism that you're going to fight, it changes everything that you're thinking about. So if I have a student who's in school 2 days a week, And now, after 3 months with a Success Mentor, he's coming to school 4 days a week. That's a huge improvement, and it changes how we look at it. We don't look at he's still absent 20% of the time. We think, oh my God, we've improved it by 100% how much he's coming to school. And so having this strategy and documenting what we're doing helps us keep our eye on what our goal is. So any questions about that? Okay, and we actually are reminded that the Attendance Works has an elementary success mentor toolkit with parents frequently asked questions and a sample parent letter. That's on Attendance Works website, and it's written for elementary school students. So any questions about that? So I thought we were, okay. Oh, I see it's in there. All right. So strength-based communication is the next piece. So I'll let you start this up, Delia, set this up, okay?
Big part of the Success Mentors model. So it's huge, and it's something
Delia,
that kind of...
Delia, you were on mute for a minute. Could you restart what you were just saying?
Oh, sure, absolutely. Yep. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I was just saying, we've been talking a lot about how strengths-based communication is a huge part of this model, but I think that's a term that gets thrown around quite a lot in our field, and it's just important to kind of illustrate what this really, really looks like. So Jean and I are going to take you guys through a little activity, and we are going to ask you to pretend that you all on the webinar who are listening in, we're going to ask you to pretend that you are a parent or a caregiver that we're calling to ask you to start to for the first time, introduce our mentoring program, our Success Mentors program. So we're going to each pitch to you our program, and then we're going to ask you to indicate in the chat box which of these programs you would like to sign your child up for. So I'm going to start, and I'm going to give you a call on your phone, Mrs. Robinson. So Mrs. Robinson, we have a brand new program for kids who need extra help and support. They're going to be assigned a mentor from the school who will meet with them and encourage them to have better attendance and work harder than they might otherwise. I think your son Tommy could really benefit from this. Would you let him participate? So that's pitch number one. And Jean, you're going to do pitch number two.
So, Mrs. Johnson, I'm so glad to speak with you today. I have a great new opportunity at school that I would love to offer to Tommy. Different staff members are going to be assigned as mentors to students to help them talk about their goals and what they aspire to, their dreams for their life. I think Tommy is someone who would take advantage of this program. I can't offer it to all the students, but I'm really hoping that you would let Tommy have this chance. Do you think it's a good idea like I do?
All right.
So now it's your time to vote. Would you sign your Tommy up for the first description or the second description?
All right, so I'm seeing a couple of chats come in here. We've got one vote for number two and another vote for number two. So it looks like two is the most popular, and if you'd like to share why you feel that way, please feel free. But we can also talk through what you heard. Which is just an example of very subtle, as you can see, strengths-based communication, thinking about Tommy as someone who could take advantage of the program was what I noticed that Jean said, not as someone who needs the program, but someone who could really take advantage of this opportunity. So there's something about Tommy that makes him, a really good candidate for it. And also just talking about the fact that it's a great opportunity that he's been selected for. And that really is how students and families should feel when they, are looking to embark on this experience. They shouldn't feel that it's something that is being assigned to them because of something, some wrong that they're doing, which unfortunately is how a lot of families feel when they get started with the mentoring program. There shouldn't be this feeling that families don't have something that this mentor can give them. It's not about that. It's just about the fact that, this is a student who can benefit from a wonderful opportunity to help them achieve their goals, not just to improve attendance for sort of the convenience of the school, which is sometimes, unfortunately, the implicit message that parents and students receive. Jean, anything else you wanted to add about that exercise?
No, I just wanted to point out what Delia read is not terrible, and I'm sure lots of school people would present it that way. This is something positive. We think Tommy would benefit from it. Will you let him participate? You know, there's nothing really terrible about that, but what it neglects to try and do is focus on the strengths-based. Tommy's got strengths. You're the kind of parent who will want Tommy to have opportunities. We think this is a great thing, and nothing that I read or said was not true. I wish I could offer it to every student, but we can't because we don't have enough mentors, and I hope you'll let Tommy be the one who could take advantage of it. So that's all good. It just requires a little bit of a different way of thinking, but the subtle message is we're on Tommy's team together, and we want to give him the best opportunity he can. That's all strengths-based. It's not a negative about you. As a parent, we're giving you a chance to make a good decision for him. And as one of my friends said when her kids were 13, 15, and 17, being the parents of a teenager is tiring, and knowing somebody else is on your team actually is a good feeling about it. Yeah. So any other questions about, you make the program, someone said you made the program sound like it was special, not for every kid. And I'm going to give you some language that we use at Mentor New York. We firmly believe at Mentor New York that every kid needs a mentor to grow up healthy. It doesn't matter if you live in $1 million house or a shack. Everybody needs a mentor. The only difference for our kids in mentoring programs and other kids is many kids find their own informal mentors. And our mentoring programs are really designed for kids who can't find them. So they might have a coach or the minister or a relative. Their grandmother lives with them and she's a mentor. Every kid really needs a mentor. And our programs really have to serve the kids who can't find those informal mentors in their lives. So there's no stigma attached to having or needing a mentor. Everybody needs one. It's just whether or not you can find one. And a mentoring program is special, and we're trying to provide it for kids who could really take advantage of it. Not every kid is in a healthy position to form a relationship with another adult, and that's true. So there are some kids for whom mentoring is not right yet. They're not ready for it or they're not right to do it. So all that positive strength-based language is really valuable when you're communicating to families, caregivers, and even to the kids themselves. I don't know if you've had the experience of trying to encourage a kid to join a program. We just did this recently with the High School for Fashion and Business, and the teachers were going to be mentors, and some of the kids said, no, I don't want to do it, and I got to go and do the kickoff. So we had games, we had interactive icebreakers, and all of a sudden there were a group of kids standing outside the classroom saying, what's this? And the vice principal said, this is the mentoring program you said you didn't want to join. And 3 girls said, oh, now I want to join, now that she saw it and saw that it was fun and interesting. So wouldn't it be great if we could have communicated that to them in the beginning? They did let her join, the girls join, of course. But mentoring is fun and exciting, and can we communicate that in a positive way so kids and families want to be part of it?
Definitely. Yeah, Jean, I love all those examples. And love what you're sharing about just engaging parents as partners, and also just assuming that they want what's best for their child as well, which I think unfortunately some of our messaging to parents doesn't necessarily assume that. But generally speaking, that is certainly the case. So, you know, starting from that place is really important. And I know, Denise, you asked earlier about some of the differences in engaging families between like elementary, middle, and high school. And I can just share one of my big observations is that students at the high school level and the older middle school level, sort of the older that they get, I think the more important sometimes agency is and choice is for them to be able to decide. And often their parents will say, well, yeah, of course I think the program's a great idea, but did you talk to Jimmy? Because, you know, I don't know if he would be interested, because they're developing their own sense of self and their own choices. And so being able to engage with the student, you know, once you get the permission of the parent to say, hey, this is why I think this program would be awesome for you. And again, this is why I see you as someone who would be really able to take advantage of this and make this your own is so important, giving the student the opportunity to say yes or no. Because as Jean said, not every student is ready or a good fit for the program at a specific time. They may not find it that it's important for them, or they may be interested in something else, and that's totally fine. But it certainly will impact whether they find it to be a beneficial experience.
And this is probably a good time to answer your question, Denise, about the differences between family engagement at the 3 different levels. When you're talking about elementary school success mentors, and several people told us when we started this pilot that elementary school students don't decide whether or not they go to school, it's their parents who decide. But the success mentors who reach out to parents and talk to them and say things like, not things like, you know, it's illegal for you to keep your child home from school, which really doesn't make a parent want to send their kid to school. In one of the schools in New York City, they send them a summons, like a court summons, that they have to show up on a certain day at a certain time, doesn't matter whether the parent works, if they want to get their kid back in school. Instead, the success mentors reach out and say, you know, we didn't see Tommy for a couple of days and we're concerned. Is everything okay with him? Do you want us to make sure he gets some homework? And through that relationship, are you going to be able to come to open school night? I hope so, because Tommy's such a great kid. I'm looking forward to meeting you. What we found is the success mentors actually help the parents solve some of the problems that kept them from going to school. I used the example of a mom who had 6-month-old twins and a first grader. And when it was snowy or rainy, she did not put the 6-month-old twins in the stroller to walk her first grader to school. It was too much for her. And so her first grader missed a lot of school. And what the success mentor did was find a couple of other people in her project who were walking their kids to school and started the walking school bus from this project, where the moms who had slightly older elementary school kids picked up a couple of kids and walked everybody to school and walked everybody home. And in return, the mom with the twins once a week would make dinner for one of the families. And I'm not talking about steak. She made, you know, spaghetti or hot dogs or something, but to thank them. And all of a sudden, her first grader went to school every single day. It wasn't complicated. It was just helping, like, neighbors figure out how to do it. And by the way, it actually helped the family be more part of their community and not so isolated, because it can be really isolating with twins that are, you know, it's February and they're 6 months old. So engaging families, again, positive, strengths-based, changes the whole relationship between the family and the student and going to school. And I always encourage people to remember that you might have had a good experience growing up, but not every parent had a good experience at school. And when they go back to school, they might feel like they're being criticized by the principal again. You're sitting in those little chairs and you were never good enough or whatever else. So people bring all their own baggage to it. So the success mentor who is actually forming a good relationship with the parent or the caregiver sets the stage for the student to be more engaged on a variety of levels. Does that answer your question about doing that?
Yeah, that's awesome, Jean. Yeah, I love that example. So we're winding into our last 15 minutes, and in that time, we wanted to make sure that we talked a little bit about screening. As we said earlier, that's a topic of its own webinar for sure, and if you are familiar with our collaborative mentoring webinar series, we actually just did a webinar last month in May in April about screening. So you can watch that webinar. You can find it on Mentor's website under the Collaborative Mentoring Webinar Series. But we did want to say a couple of quick things, because this is definitely going to impact the way you think about recruitment, because screening is really going to be a part of that process. And screening, we say, is a part of every single stage of the process, right? Anytime you're interacting with a mentor, you're screening them. You're seeing, you know, how are they doing? Are they able to serve as a mentor for this child? And so when we think about screening, we think about two things. We think about safety, and then we think about suitability. So on this slide, you'll see just very, very brief overview, and there's a lot more to learn if you look at the Elements of Effective Practice, which has a whole chapter about screening. But what you want to know, at a very, very basic level, national fingerprint-based FBI criminal background checks is really the standard for anybody who's coming into a school, but certainly anybody who's working with young people in a mentoring capacity. And generally, we find that that's a given working with existing staff in public schools, right, because folks are screened before they become a school professional, public school professional. But particularly when you're working with an external community member who hasn't been screened by another organization, you just want to think about, what's going to be required financially for your school to be able to conduct those background checks. And as I said, the FBI background checks, those are really, really a basic standard, and there's a lot more you can do to screen for safety that will give you a better picture of whether somebody is a safe individual to match up with a student. There's an interview, which will help you understand students' motivations, mentors' motivations for getting involved with the program, which is a really important piece of the process. Why do they want to get involved? That'll tell you a lot about who they are. And also checking references and talking with other people, with their friends and family members who, do those people think that they would be a successful mentor for a student? Do they have any concerns, and what are those? And so again, can't go into too much detail about what types of questions you will ask, but you can find resources in the Elements. There's also a great module that's pretty brief but also very informative on Mentor's website, and so when you're able to access this deck, you'll be able to click those links. But I did want to kick it to you, Jean, just to talk a little bit about red flags, because this is something that I think you know a little bit more about in terms of what is a red flag and what are some examples of red flags that folks should be looking out for as they're screening for safety.
So actually, we want you to do a criminal background check that's a fingerprint check. It is the standard. People can have multiple Social Security numbers. One of my programs had somebody who had 12 Social Security numbers. So a fingerprint check is you can't fudge your fingerprints. But many people who harm children have never been arrested and certainly not convicted. So there's more to screening that you have to think about than just the criminal background check. And that's looking for things about the person that would make you uncomfortable about putting them together with a child. So here's a simple example. When you look at the person as a whole and you ask them, what kinds of, how do you spend your free time outside of your work? Do you volunteer for other organizations? If you start to hear that there aren't very many opportunities that the person has to interact with adults, they only interact with young people, that would make you stop and think, because if you think about your own lives, you might be a great community member who helps with the local softball league or the soccer team, but you also play poker one night a week with your friends who are adults, or you're part of a bowling league or a fraternity, or you go fishing with somebody. So you want to balance and take a look at how is this person spending their time, and if all their activities are focused in young people, then I would explore further. If somebody's exasperated with the interview process and the screening process, you might want to think about, is this person going to be patient with a child? Because we know that kids come with all kinds of things that don't keep you moving ahead in a straight line. If those of you who have children will know, being a parent means going ahead 2 steps and back 3 steps and ahead 1 step. That's how life goes. If the person's exasperated about the process of filling out the forms and waiting for the answers, you might want to think about, is this reasonable for him to be upset, or does this demonstrate a person who's not going to be able to be patient with a student, or does this demonstrate a person who's not concerned about following the rules, and does that mean I'm not going to be able to manage her because she thinks she knows better about how to run our program, and I can't count on her to follow our rules, which are important, like you don't meet outside the community, you only meet at school. If the mentor doesn't follow that rule, how do I know she's a safe driver and she's taking the student to places that are safe? These are all flags that you want to think about when you're bringing in community members who are not part of your school system. Asking for references is also critical, and we try to encourage you to ask questions in a reference that gets us some of the things that you might have a concern about. So my colleague Bruce remembers somebody who was complaining about how long the screening process was taking. His was a community-based model, so it was very important. And so in his reference, he said to the person he was calling, can you describe the last time you saw this person lose her temper? He didn't say, does she ever get angry, because the person would just say no. So he said, can you describe a time when she lost her temper? And the person on the other end of the reference said, oh, yeah, we were at this restaurant, and they brought the wrong dish, and she really went off on the waiter. I didn't think it was such a big deal, blah, blah, blah. And what he said to himself was, the feeling I had that she wasn't going to be patient enough or consistent enough to be with the kids is the right one, and he turned her down for that reason. She wasn't a criminal, but he also wanted to think about, is she going to be a good person that I can manage to follow in the process? One of the things I'm going to say about this, we've done a lot of research in New York about, you know, what's an appropriate question you can ask, and for New York, I have some examples of that. But the bottom line is you don't have to have a reason not to take someone on as a mentor, and it's especially appropriate if you're bringing community volunteers in to take a look at how you're feeling about the whole totality of the person, their criminal background check, their references, the interview, why they want to be a mentor, and to put that all together and to use your gut feeling about whether or not this is going to be a good person. And you can turn them down because you're not convinced. No one has a legal right to be a volunteer in your program, and you should err on the side of caution about taking on someone that you're not sure about, because it is a real child that you're going to put them together with. So, questions about that?
Thank you. No questions yet, but feel free, folks who are on the line, to chat in any questions that you might have. And in the meantime, I'm going to move us to suitability. Jean, that was a great overview of safety. Thank you so much. And we just want to take a moment also to talk about suitability, right? Because as Jean is saying, you know, someone might be quote unquote a safe person. That doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be a good mentor. And it is important for us to be selective and to choose the best mentors for our students. And so we wanted to take a moment as we're thinking about suitability to ask you, how would you describe an ideal mentor? And how would you describe an ideal student who could benefit from a mentor, right? That's also good to know because, as we said, you might be talking to students about why you think they're a great fit for the program. So it's good for you to know, you know, what that actually means. What does that look like? So take a moment to type in some ideas that you might have about what makes an ideal mentor. What kinds of qualities are you looking for? And in the meantime, I think Jean and I can just share a couple of quick thoughts about this. I mean, for me, I worked at a Big Brothers Big Sisters organization for about 4 years, and I met a lot of mentors in that time and matched a lot of mentors with mentees. Some were great matches, others not as much. And I would say that one of the biggest things that I learned in that time is to look out for mindsets like a savior complex, for lack of a better word. There are some folks out there who volunteer as mentors because they think that young people are deficient in some way, or that they have to be able to give them something as a mentor that the young person doesn't have, or that their parent or their family isn't giving them something that they might need. And you know, that might be true for some students, but largely when a person volunteers to be a mentor for that reason, because they want to save someone, or you're noticing language where there's sort of an exaggerated sense of power for this person in a young person's life, we like to make sure that we're working with people who have a realistic expectation of what their impact is, not only because, you know, they may not understand what their role really is, but they may also become very frustrated and disappointed in the relationship, which can have an impact on the student. So I think, unfortunately, to different degrees, I saw that with some mentors that came through and began asking much more targeted questions about why folks are volunteering, why now, and you know, what do they expect to happen in the relationship. Those are all kinds of questions that can help you get at, you know, whether someone has the right mindset, the right expectations to be working with a student. And Jean, anything that you would want to add around what you look for in terms of suitability?
One of the most important things I think is to have a person who's non-judgmental, so that you can take the student where they are, take the family where they are, and not pass judgment. So when I met my mentee, she was in first grade. The first thing she did, she cursed. And without thinking, I said, does your mother let you talk like that? Such a typical reaction, right? Except she said to me, yes, she likes it that I do that. And then I thought, oh, now what have you done, Jean? How do you answer that? I've been outsmarted by a 7-year-old. And as I was driving home, I remember thinking to myself, what kind of a mother lets a 7-year-old curse? But then, of course, I said to myself, actually, you don't know that her mother lets her curse. So let's not pass judgment on her. And if she does, that's her choice. So when I went back the next week, I said to her, you know, I know you said your mom doesn't mind if you curse, but I don't like people to curse around me, so when we're together, could you try not to use bad words? My mother doesn't care if I use bad words. I said, that's okay, but I don't like it when people use bad words around me, so could you try? And, of course, she did. And, of course, over the years, I mentored her for 10 years. I got to know her mother very well, and her mother never let her curse, okay? So that was just a 7-year-old, you know, giving me the business. But I realized right then that I had to not pass judgment on her or her family. I was there to try to be a good mentor to her in the best way I can and not to assume that I knew everything about them and how they operated, because I didn't. And I would look for that in a person so that they can, you know, start where the kid is, start where the family is, and do the best they can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, Jean, and certainly we're not looking for the perfect humans, right, because that's what training is for, you know, especially folks who don't necessarily have a lot of experience with young people. They may have some misconceptions, but I think what I look for, too, is this someone who's willing to grow, who's willing to interact and engage with me and learn the things that they may not know. So it's another quality. Some of the things I'm seeing in the chat box here are someone who's a good listener, willing listener, someone who's encouraging and supportive, patient and flexible, and respectful of differences. I think cultural awareness and cultural competence is a huge, huge asset for mentors. It's absolutely critical for mentors who are working with students who are different from them culturally. So, you know, an openness, a humility around the idea of difference is going to be huge. So those are just a couple of things that folks have shared. Anything else you want to add, Jean, before we wrap up?
Oh, thank you.
Okay. All right. So we're getting into our last few minutes here, and again, just you know, really, really encourage folks to learn more about screening, because that wasn't the focus of today's webinar, just by accessing those resources. But we wanted to wrap up by sharing a timeline with you. This is just a sample timeline of, you know, the different steps that are involved in the recruitment process. Jean, did you want to walk through this quickly?
Sure, and the idea is really, if you want to start your program in the fall, is to spend some time now, or even last month, but last month is over, so good for you doing it now, to think about what the goal of your program is, design what you want to have happen, try to do some recruiting. This would be a great time to put some materials together, and it's all laid out here. Maybe talk to a staff meeting about what you're going to do, and then in the summer, remind the people who've come forward as mentors and partners to remind them that you're going to keep going, so you're keeping them encouraged. Schedule your pre-match trainings. Relaunch mentor recruitment, because some people might not have been able to think about it over the summer, but now will come forward. And just to walk you through all these different steps, don't be discouraged if you're saying, well, I should have done that last winter. Think through what you need to think about and continue it. And I will say that as you get the hang of this, and people in your school community become mentors, certainly for the first year or two, you should ask the people who are volunteering as mentors to be the recruiters for you for next spring, because they will talk about how much fun they're having, or how the student has improved, or how it helps them see a student's challenges and help them with it. So as you redo this timeline for next year, add in, use our existing mentors to help recruit new ones. But this lays it out so you can take it step by step and move forward. None of this, I just want to say, is rocket science. In your daytime jobs, you probably handle much more complicated challenges than this. It's just you need to be methodical about it and follow the best practices to get the kind of outcomes that you want. So you want to talk about references and additional resources?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So, yeah, so we've got a couple things on our website for folks who are going to access this slide deck on the web page. You'll see there's a Men in Mentoring toolkit. There's some folks in our field who want to really make sure that they're getting a balance of meeting the needs for boys and young men who want mentors. And so there's some specific tools in that toolkit about recruiting men. And then there's a general toolkit about effective mentor recruitment that you might find helpful. And then there's a ton of resources in the community toolbox and the UMaryland guide that we mentioned earlier on asset mapping. So you'll be able to access all of those links when you receive this deck on the web page. So we have just a minute for questions. I haven't seen any coming through, and I think we're about to end our time. So happy to have folks email us, Jean and myself, if you are interested in talking more about any of the topics that you heard about. We definitely want to encourage you guys to visit the web page, to sign up for the listserv, and then to reach out to me if you're interested in no-cost technical assistance or coaching about recruitment or any of the other elements that we talked about. So we do have that resource available at no cost. We encourage you to visit the National Mentoring Resource Center as well as Mentor and Mentor New York's websites for more information. And I just want to say a special thank you to Jean Cohen for all of your amazing insights today. Thank you so much for being on with us today.
Thanks for inviting me. I always enjoy talking about a program that works so well.
Thank you. And thank you everyone else for joining as well. So we'll let you go. Have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks, Felix. Thank you, Jean.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.